Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. As we wrap up the week, there are several stories that we're still following. Immigration. It is our top story this evening. We're going to be separating fact from fiction about the surge when it comes to migrants at the border. We're going to be speaking with a nun whose work at the border earned her a shout out from the Pope himself. Then we'll get into So Right, They're Wrong. I'm going to show you how Donald Trump, believe it or not, still, as of last night, spreading blatant lies about the Capitol riot and in the process denigrating the police officers who saved lives that terrible day. Plus, Republicans in Georgia, they've just passed a sweeping bill to restrict in a huge way access to voting. They claim it's to prevent fraud, but I'm going to show you why it really is just pure politics. But we begin at the border, where migrants continue to come into this country and strain the Biden administration's ability to handle them. President Biden, he spent a lot of time on this issue during his news conference yesterday.
I guess I should be flattered. People are coming because I'm the nice guy. That's the reason why it's happening. That I'm a decent man, or however it's phrased. That, that's why they're coming, because Biden's a good guy. Truth of the matter is, nothing has changed. There is a significant increase in the number of people coming to the border in the winter months of January, February, March. It happens every year. In addition to that, there is and by the way, does anybody suggest that there was a 31% increase under Trump because he was a nice guy?
Even though Republicans continue to say that Biden's policies are driving the surge, I should point out that there is nothing unusual about what is happening right now. At this time of year, we typically see increases in migrants coming across the border. In 2019, the numbers at least hold up as similar to this year, but the numbers do keep going up, mainly because COVID is hammering the Central American countries where the people are hailing from, and it is making an already difficult situation with difficult economies even worse. Plus, you add natural disasters like hurricanes, which were particularly severe late last year. Also, the surge is not being driven by just unaccompanied minors. Wall Street Journal reported that most of the people being picked up at the border control are men who are coming looking for work. Plus, a lot of folks on the far right are saying that Biden is treating migrants worse than Trump did, and simply they're not paying attention or they're just lying. The Trump administration instituted a zero-tolerance policy, intentionally split up families, and they admitted they were using it as a deterrent.
If you're smuggling a child, then we're going to prosecute you. And that child will be separated from you probably as required by law. If you don't want your child to be separated, then don't bring them across the border illegally.
Now, the Biden administration has gotten rid of that, and he also got rid of the stay in Mexico policy.
The idea that I'm going to say, which I would never do, that if an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're just going to let him starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that either, except Trump. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Not only that, but you have a fringe right now that is not just debating what our immigration policy should be, but they're demonizing migrants.
What we're doing here is we are promoting a lower level of human being who will be controlled from other countries. So stop trying to make this about this is not who we are. This is about crime coming into this country.
I should mention the person there, Jeanine Pirro, who's been a guest on this program. She should know better. She used to be a district attorney of a county with 1 million residents, and she's also 100% wrong here. National Academy of Sciences analyzed crime stats from Texas over a 7-year period. The numbers show undocumented immigrants were less than a half as likely to commit violent crimes or drug offenses than people who were born into the states. In fact, across the board, immigrant populations has lower crime rates than do U.S. citizens. Now, before I get to my guest, I want to put a human face on the people who are desperate enough to walk literally thousands of miles to cross a border into a strange country speaking a different language. More often than not, we're talking about the faces of desperation. These are the people who are being called criminals, and as you just heard, they're lower levels of humans. I want to start with Mariella Hernandez. She, a 36-year-old woman from Honduras. Again, the Wall Street Journal writing about her story, quote, Hernandez used to rise at 4 a.m. daily to make and sell tortillas, but keeping up with the extortion payments to the gangs had become too difficult. She could no longer afford her daughter's textbook and school uniform fees. Quote, I can't raise my daughter in a place like that. Then there's Mariella, a 41-year-old woman from El Salvador. She decided to migrate after she received death threats when she started to investigate her brother's murder in a gang killing. She says, our lives are in danger. The situation in El Salvador, worse than during the war in the 1980s. Back then, you knew who was who. Nowadays, you can get killed by anyone for any reason. Finally, Ilsa Ramirez. She, a 24-year-old woman, also from Honduras. Her son's father has been murdered. She says, I walked hundreds of miles, mostly carrying my son. She had to leave her young daughter behind. Ilsa says it was difficult, but there was no way to stay in Honduras. It's impossible to live and to work. There is no work. I want to bring in my guest tonight. She has spent the past 20 years of her life helping immigrants in South Texas. That work got her named to Time Magazine's list of the most influential people in 2020. Even Pope Francis made time to honor her.
Sister, I want to thank you. Through you, I want to thank all the sisters of religious orders in the U.S. for the work that you have done and that you do in the United States. It's great. I'll tell you one other thing. Is it inappropriate for the Pope to say this?
Las quiero mucho.
I love you all very much.
Well, let's bring in right now Sister Norma Pimentel. She's Executive Director of the Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley. And it's tough to top a shout out from the Pope. But Sister, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.
You know, people are going to throw around a lot of numbers, and I understand it when we're talking about immigration. But I'd like, as best you can, to put a human face on who's coming, what they're leaving or running from, and what they're hoping to find. As I understand it, you're dealing with a shelter with not unaccompanied minors, but families with children 7 and under. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. Yes, definitely. We're seeing a lot of families come to our center now, as we did before in 2019, 2014. Throughout those years, we've always received families, and today is no different. You know, the numbers are not as high as in 2019, but I'm certain that they could very well get there very soon. But the thing is that these families are coming because nothing has changed. You know, we have never really addressed what is happening back home, the root causes, and these families continue to flee a reality that is very painful and difficult for a mother that has a child that's afraid for the life of that kid. And so this is why these mothers dare travel and go through so much through this journey and find themselves in the other side of the river and wanting to enter the United States to be safe, you know. And so this is what we're seeing here. They're here in our community in the U.S. side because of the fact that the border, because even though it's closed, everybody's being actually sent back to Mexico or to their countries in great numbers. There's no change, but that only one change that happened, as you mentioned, the families that we are seeing are mothers with kids under the age of 7, 6 and under. And these families are not able to be returned back to Mexico as everybody else is, because Mexico has a policy that does not allow the United States to return these kids back to Mexico. And so therefore, that is who we're seeing. And in great numbers, of course, these families that are here. And honestly, you know, I've accompanied them for these past 2 years when this remaining Mexico policy was in place, and they had to wait in Mexico under very difficult conditions. I saw day after day mothers suffering with their little children in conditions that were so inhumane and difficult that any mother would just feel so terrible, the fact that they could not keep their child from crying out of for example, this past winter storm that we had, and it was so terrible, the freezing temperatures. Mom sent me a video of their little kid crying uncontrollably. At midnight, I get this video and say, Madrecita, mira, my little kid, not even 10 years old, was uncontrollably crying because his little toes were frozen and he couldn't stand the pain. This is what the mothers go through, time after time after time, under those conditions that our policies, Remaining Mexico policy, contributed to this human suffering. Now, these are not criminals. These are mothers, like many of our mothers here in the U.S. who all they care about is bringing their child to a place that's safe. And I honestly do not believe, and I see our Border Patrol here at the border going out of their way to do their job. And they don't release criminals into the United States. They release families who are vulnerable, who are victims of crime, that are running away precisely of all these criminals, and that's what's happening at the border right now. And we're trying to do our best to treat them with the dignity and respect that any human person deserves.
Sister, 2 years ago, I was to the west of you. I was on the Tijuana-San Diego border, and we went to some of the shelters on both sides of the border. What struck me was the crying, that, they couldn't comfort the kids. They themselves, the unknown that was in front of them. This was not something where people were looking for the golden ticket to try and get in, with a quirk in the system or to try and beat the immigration policy. They were running from something awful. And they had no idea what tomorrow held. I don't know, but I have a feeling, and I'm curious if you agree, if America got to spend a day in your shelter, do you think they'd have a different idea about the people we're talking about?
I am certain that all of us, there's not one human being other than that who just refuses to feel in their heart the compassion that you see in front of you of this person suffering, this mother crying, this mother saying, ayúdame, help me. I've had this one person one time, and I always remember sharing this story when this lady in the community came to my center and said, Sister, I'm against all of this that you're doing here. And I said, thank you for letting me know. Let me show you what I do and why. And I introduced her to the moms and to the children and talked to her about what was happening and why these families, these vulnerable victims of crime, these innocent victims were there, and she turns around and tells me, I'm 100% in favor of what you're doing. I don't know anyone that would not feel what I feel when I see this reality before me. I think that people who just simply refuse to see are the ones that are so shut down from human reality, and not change their way of looking at what's happening.
Sister, I've heard two different accounts of what's going on. One is, listen, you go back every year around March, you're going to see the same amount of people coming up because, the rainy season is over, the winter, this is the more temperate time to come up. And then other people are like, listen, not like now. Now we're seeing a huge influx, particularly of young families or young unaccompanied minors. How is this year different than prior years?
It's not different at all. In 2014, we saw the same thing happen. So many children, there were so many of them. They were in detention facilities that it was impossible to provide them with the care they needed. They were dirty and muddy and crying and packed in because they had no other option to keep them in those conditions until they could release them to the proper group that was responsible to move them forward. It's amazing how it is an exploitation of human suffering and of people, innocent victims. And it's amazing how we allow ourselves to just be lured into that and believe that the problem is somebody else's or something else is happening, and not really look at what really is happening at the border and the fact that there's so much human suffering, and we must move above all of that and come to find solutions that contribute to a process that is safe and orderly and legal if possible. That's how it needs to be. But we must come together and do something and making this response the right response.
Sister, I really appreciate the time and the work that you're doing there. Godspeed. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, folks, when we come back, we will move away from the border and we'll head to Washington. It's our next segment that we call So Right They're Wrong. I'm going to show you how Trump is flat out lying about what happened on January 6th with the Capitol riot that he incited. He's also in the process of insulting the police officers who tried to protect that Capitol and lawmakers that day, some even giving their lives in the process.